about what's called relativism. And let me explain relativism. First, there are different kinds of relativism, and some forms of relativism are true. Here, it's based in truth. For instance, relativism could mean like this. I have a little grandson. He's about this tall. And when I put all my grandsons around me, I'm tall and they're short. But we have a guy in our church who's 7'5". When I move from this little environment of all my grandchildren and I go and I stand and I look at him, relative to him, he is tall and I am short. In fact, relative to him, everybody's short. When it comes to intellect, there are certain people I can be around and I feel really smart. There are people that I've been around where I feel really unintelligent. Intellect can be relative. We're not talking about that kind of relativity. We're talking about moral relativity. Moral relativity. Now let me just read the definition here of moral relativity. Here's what it says, moral relativism. There is no universal objective truth according to relativism. Rather, each point of view has its own truth. In other words, there is such a thing as subjective truth, meaning I have my subjective truth, you have your subjective. I like lasagna, you like something else. I like my wife's lasagna, you like somebody else. That's subjective truth. My wife's lasagna is the best lasagna in the world according to Jim Putman. But moral objective truth says there is an absolute truth for all people in all times. Moral relativism says there is not. So I want you to understand what we're talking about here. Now, this is the way you will have heard it. What's true for me is true for me, and what's true for you is true for you. So pluralism and universalism lead to and can be similar to moral relativism. This is what's being taught all across our nation and now in many places around the world. Again, this is a concept that many people hold on to. Now, I want you to notice when they say what's true for me is true for me and what's true for you is true for you, they are saying there is something that's true for them. They just get to decide what it is. So when you ask, well, where does your truth come from? Where did you get it? They will give you several different answers. Let me give you a couple of them. Number one, they will say, well, I trust my heart. I trust my heart. My feelings dictate my truth. Here's the problem with that. Jeremiah, the Bible says that your heart is the most wicked of all things, and no one can understand it. Not even you, especially you or me, our own hearts. Our feelings, here's the problem with letting feelings dictate truth. They change. How many of you have felt one thing about one thing at one time and later on felt something different about that same thing? Based on what you ate, how much sleep you got, I've had some really terrible feelings pre-coffee in the morning, every single day. Feelings cannot be good standards, and heaven help you if you're ever married to someone who says, I follow my heart. Because what that means is, if their feelings change over time, and what we find out in our culture in America, feelings do change. If you've had children with a person, if you have been dedicated to them based on the fact that you gave your word and you're going to choose to love rather than love being a feeling, and you're married to someone whose love is a feeling, it's going to lead oftentimes to a very painful journey for you. Problem with this kind of thing is, if my feelings are my truth, then I might go right over the top of my wife's feelings, just run her down, because that's not my truth. So my truth leads me to run right over the top of your truth and your feelings, and it's a very painful experience. The second kind of truth people come up with is that my truth is based on my history and my experiences. The problem is, I don't know about you, there have been times where I've done the same thing in at two different times that led to two completely different outcomes. Have you ever had that happen? You do the same thing. One time it works, one time it doesn't. Based on experiences, if your history dictates truth for you, then oftentimes that means you're driving in a car analogy. You're driving forward, but you're looking in a rearview mirror, and it doesn't lead to very good places in your future. Third, some people will say, well, I accept what the culture tells me is true. So truth is a political thing. It's a choice that the whole culture gets to make. But here's the problem. How many times do we know a whole culture has been absolutely wrong? Slavery in America. Prime example. There was a time where if you would have voted on it, this culture would have said that's absolutely fine, and they would have been dead wrong. In Germany, Nazism, there was a time, how does that take over a whole country? Well, in their culture, it was okay. And so they can kill 6 million Jews. When you allow culture to dictate beauty or truth or whatever, you know, you may not know this, but the second president of the United States, one of the founding fathers, actually said that democracy only works when you have a moral people. As soon as you have an immoral people that vote based out of their immorality, that means no matter what you believe, the group outvotes you. We are approaching very quickly, and I think we've already arrived, where our culture will vote for a whole lot of things, and we'll say, well, that must make it right. Lastly, I'll do what science tells me. Whatever science says. Problem with that is we got a whole history just in the last 10 years of theories people absolutely believed in, but with new information, it all changed. When you say, well, what's true for me is true for me, and what's true for you is true for you, where does your truth come from? Well, it leads all over the place. Well, let me just give you some problems with all of this. First, I think I already said this. When you're trying to work together with other people, in relationship, on a team, in a church, in a country, moral relativity does not lead to teamwork, unity, or relationship. I mean, I'm one of those people that I believe that we ought to allow immigrants into the country, but the immigrants who come into the country, and I don't want to get political here, the immigrants who come into the country have to want to assimilate, and they can't bring Sharia law or whatever form of law with them and say, no, I want to be in this country, but I want to create my own little country within a country, because what happens is this doesn't lead to the United States of America. What it leads to is either a clash between cultures internally or a separation of cultures internally. It doesn't lead to unity or relationship. There has to be some minimum thing we agree on, or we can't actually work together. It doesn't work for a team. Could you imagine? You want to have a football team, and you say, okay, everybody come. I know you've come from about 50 different forms of football. Just come on over, and when we get in the huddle, you can have each of your own playbooks, your own language, your own, what you think you ought to do, and I'll call a play in the huddle. The problem is you won't know what the play is because we don't have the same language. We'll all have our individual jobs, but we won't understand what anybody else does. And it doesn't matter how much talent you have, it leads to absolute chaos when we don't have a standard form of morality we accept. Does this make sense to you? Not only does it not make any sense, it doesn't lead to relationship, but it's not even consistent with what we see in the world. We live in a world that is so finely tuned that when you look at the earth and how it's tilted and where the moon is, and how if the moon was further away or closer, then the tides would come complete. There's enough water in the oceans to completely bury land. If the moon or the sun was 1 degree closer or 1 degree further away, we either freeze to death or fry. You see ecosystems. You see such detail. You see this brilliantly formed, intelligently designed world. And so you go, well, I know that God had a lot of standards and rules and design in the ecosystem, but when it comes to people relationships, just do whatever you want. It's all good. The great designer of the world said, yeah, when it comes to how we actually live together, I mean, I know I created a really cool designed world, sun, moon, stars, your brain, your mind, your eyes, all of it works together. But when it comes to you guys getting along, just do whatever. That's consistent. Well, it's illogical. The law of non-contradiction, the principle of non-contradiction says two absolutely opposite things cannot both be true. I mean, when you look at logic itself that they'll teach in every philosophy class around the world, they will say the principle of non-contradiction is absolutely logical and consistent until we start talking about morality. Then it's what's good for you is good for you. It's illogical. Beyond that, nobody actually believes it. It sounds really high and intelligent, and people are like, yeah, what's good for you, that's so cool. No, nobody actually really believes that. You see, every one of us might believe, what's good for me is good for me, and I can do whatever I want, but you don't get to do whatever you want in my life, pal. Nobody actually believes that it's okay for you to come and steal from me. Nobody actually believes it's okay for you to come and punch my wife and then go, well, what's good for you is good for you, and what's good for me is good for me. You don't actually believe that. Nobody does. It doesn't work. But beyond all those reasons why it doesn't work and it can't be true and it's inconsistent and it's not biblical. Again, remember, if you're a Christian, you've accepted some things. You accepted Jesus. Now again, there are a whole bunch of people that actually have created their own synchronistic worldview when it comes to the Christianity. They're like, oh, I like this part right here, but this over here, where's a pin? I'm gonna mark that out, I'm gonna cut that out. I don't like that. They actually have created a synchronistic sort of faith. Biblically, though, Jesus doesn't give us the right to create our own faith. Jesus, when you accepted him for who he was, if you truly accepted him, and he is the Messiah, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the creator, designer. He's the savior of the world. And he's trying to save a world that got broken because they didn't agree with him.